When you think of a weapon that is broken in a game, what comes to your mind? There's some literal examples. Then there's weapons so overpowered that they tip the scale of balance on its head. Then there's one in Elden Ring we have already talked about, how it almost ruined the game, the Rivers of Blood katana. But what if I led you the wrong way? What if there was one weapon that could be any weapon in the game while you used your own? See, this isn't a video about a weapon, not in the traditional sense. This is a video about a spirit summon that can create any weapon and build. This is what happens when Elden Ring showed players that an easy mode did exist. This is the story of the Mimic Tier. Summoning my own Mimic Tier to tell you twice that I'm trying to reach 100,000 subs on this channel. So give that button a love tap if you enjoyed this content. It means a lot, and thank you for being you. I want to start this video off by saying that you can choose to play Elden Ring however you want to, and that your journey is yours for a reason. Everyone has a different story of how they played and beat the game, more so how they choose to partake in boss fights. With that being said, the Mimic Tier was a point of contention since its introduction in Elden Ring in 2022. From the beginning of Elden Ring in the gameplay trailer that released shortly before the playtest, the Spirit Ash summons were shown to play a huge part of the experience. This would make Elden Ring unlike the other From Software games, as on top of its own open world elements, you could now summon different types of NPCs besides the ones outside of boss fog walls. If Let Me Solo Her couldn't help you beat Malenia, maybe the spirit summon of another great warrior could. Let's be honest though, Let Me Solo Her doesn't lose. The game teaches you early on that spirit summons will play a heavy role in the experience, as when you journey to Godric's Stormvale Castle, you meet Roderica.
Oh, I know. Can you take this little one along with you? The poor friend. The spirits look rather fondly upon you. It will be glad of your company, I think, the little one.
And just like that, a massive aspect of Elden Ring was unlocked. But I want to give you some perspective on the controversy of playing this way to some players. For starters, the jellyfish summon is tame compared to the Mimic Tier, but the idea of a phantom spirit taking the attention of the boss undoubtedly makes fighting bosses a lot more relaxed. If you take a fight against a boss like Margit in this case, the jellyfish can take aggression or aggro and allow you some free hits on the boss. Again, this is fine if you want to play this way, but the feeling that Miyazaki has described in the past of overcoming great odds loses some of its validity when you're not alone in that fight. That being said, Miyazaki famously said that for Dark Souls, but for Elden Ring, Miyazaki has said, quote, "What I want to stress is that we didn't set out with the goal to make an open world game in the traditional sense. We don't set out to create a difficult game. We set out to create a challenging game." Challenges can come from many different aspects in Elden Ring, and I would say it's finding the best weapon to suit a fight, the best Ash of War with an attack, the best talisman, or figuring out spirit summons and beating a boss that way. The lesson of Elden Ring is to lose, then come back stronger after exploring the world. However, one spirit summon is not like the others, and this one doesn't take the form of a champion, but the player, his or herself. That's right, your best friend and worst enemy, the Mimic Tier, is you. So now imagine if you could fight bosses with 2 prime Rivers of Blood. Wouldn't that trivialize bosses? Wouldn't that explain everyone in my comments on the Malenia video saying that she was easy? I believe this is the one spirit summon that went too far. You find this in a weird way too, using a stone sword key in Nokron and just opening a chest to grab it. And before everyone loses their minds in the comments, please just have a look at what the Mimic Tier is capable of. The way the Mimic Tier works is by consuming half the HP of the player at the cost of having a clone, and in its original pre-nerf state, it was more than capable of decimating the hardest challenges in Elden Ring, especially if you leveled it up to level 10. Nowadays, it's not as strong. Or is it? More on that a little bit later. But just like Rivers of Blood, it's still one of the best options in the game for a reason. But unlike Rivers of Blood, the Mimic Tier is still a copy of the player, and that alone is very strong. As you get stronger, so too does your Mimic. The conversation online fits exactly the controversy I'm talking about. Multiple Reddit posts saying the Mimic Tier is too OP. Some suggestions for the Mimic Tier saying that the character's parameters should be reduced. Some of them are insanely overpowered, and so the Mimic Tier takes on that same power. Others saying that it's busted OP, and they're usually not the ones to complain about OP items in the game, but it turns it into an easy mode, and the boss can solo bosses on its own. These posts would go on to take forums and even headlines of articles themselves. The number one comment in every discussion, however, is if it's too strong, then just don't use it, which is completely valid. Part of me wonders if that's a double-edged sword that exists, and if it plays into human nature itself in the category of games that Elden Ring finds itself in. Do you always have to outdo the challenge that's in front of you? Think about it. Every Souls game has hitless runners, speed runners, challenge runners, and more that all push the limits of what's thought possible. Some for glory and the attention of admiration, others for the pure love of pushing themselves to the greatest challenges. But there is an angle that isn't discussed as much: the preservation of feeling that your journey has had in others' eyes. I think ultimately people want validation for taking down the tough boss. And not to get too deep in this video, but they don't realize that that really just comes from within. So to wrap back to the comment of, don't use it if it's too OP for you, I think that depends on the view of the player who is discussing it, and what their views are on the ultimate challenges of the game, and the quote-unquote way you're meant to play. What do you think though? Drop me a comment. In my opinion, I won't tell people how to enjoy the game, but don't be in someone else's ear bragging about how easy a boss is if your Mimic was taking all the hits and dealing all the damage with you. For the Mimic Tier, it was nerfed in health and damage about a month after the release of Elden Ring, and the change was not only damage, but apparently the behavior of the Ash. This video by Schlecht, yeah, we're just gonna say Schlecht, would go on to discuss the difference in behavior pre-nerf and post-nerf.
And the Mimic Tier, of course, was one of those things that actually broke the game. It was too powerful, it was OP, you could actually let the Mimic Tier kill the bosses on its own. I only got the patch, and now I let the Mimic Tier lose again. As you can see, I really can't see much of a difference.
It wasn't really a big change, just the aggression that was slightly tweaked. Some comments heavily disagreed with the nerf, like this one saying that the Mimic Tier nerf was incredibly unnecessary. I know Elden Ring and all of FromSoft games are supposed to be hard, but in my opinion, Elden Ring suffers from artificial difficulty syndrome, which is a term I just completely made up while typing this. Thanks Reddit, always coming in clutch. I think what this user was trying to specify is that Elden Ring's difficulty feels like it goes off the scale at times, and having the Mimic Tier is a way to kind of balance the endgame bosses. Whether you agree with that or disagree with that. My personal belief is that I will always stand by the opinion that Elden Ring is a game of experimentation, exploring, and builds. So sometimes a build is going to help you on that journey. What I can say is that balance has never really been Elden Ring's strength. And how could it be? With hundreds of weapons and different ways to play the games, it's no wonder something like the Mimic Tier existed in the game this way. But the Mimic Tier also felt like the Spirit Ash summon, and it might have hurt the rest of them on the list. So I did some digging, and it turns out the Mimic Tier used to have reason for why it was so much stronger. It had an awesome quest that was cut from the final game with proper voice acting and steps. So, for this next section, we're going to talk about the cut quest that might even be controversial in and of itself.
Please wait. Proud, tarnished warrior, before you kill me, let me speak. I can aid you. Please, just hear me out.
Thanks to Datamines and the channel Nullrin, who I will link in the description, the Mimic Tier was not how it is today. In the Elden Ring we play, the Mimic Tier is found as a boss fight on the pursuit of Ranni's quest in the underground city of Nokron. What's great about this boss fight is that since you're fighting a clone of yourself, you can strip down to nothing to make the fight easier. Or you can Radahn cosplay and get destroyed. Your choice. Asimi's questline is pretty gross. The living inside of me and seeing that the Silver Tier describes her as an infection makes this cut quest even more wacky. Asimi does add a lot of context to Nokron as well when you reach this place.
Do you hear that? The sound of water. The river that flows in my home. The Eternal City. Good Lord Host, I beg you. We must see the Eternal City. Great Lord Host, may I ask something of you? A chalice is close by. The cradle of my kind. You should find the chalice and drink it dry.
The chalice Asimi is describing would not show up in the main game either, which is partially a shame for why the Mimic Tier feels so out of left field in the main game. And honestly, Nokron as a whole separate from Ranni's quest. There is this much of a quest with a lot more context to Nokron, and yet in the final release, it feels lost. I don't think From Software would cut quests without reason to do so. But it is a shame that this one was lost to the final release, just like so many others. I wonder if we'll see this quest play out in the DLC.
You found me. I had hoped you wouldn't. You could have become Elden Lord, and I could have become Sovereign Eternal, eventually, if you hadn't found me. We both could have been lords. My apologies, Lord Host. I will take the throne. I'm dying. So this is fear. I'm glad, my Lord Host. Worthiest of lords.
Well, no matter what, Asimi turns on the player, becoming that Mimic Tier boss fight we do get in the main game. But the issues I'd imagine this quest was cut for is that it would interfere with Ranni's quest overall, and that maybe it wouldn't make sense to have Asimi wearing a different outfit than when you first had her reborn. That, and it just might not have been in the cards for From Software. No matter what, it might explain that the reward for this quest was so strong. No matter the case, as we head into Elden Ring's DLC, the Mimic Tier is exactly the controversial summon you thought it was, and is. The Elden Ring community will go back and forth on this summon for the rest of time, and it's up to you to decide where you land. Will you be playing Shadow of the Erdtree with this summon or not? Let me know. And thank you for watching my video. I greatly appreciate it, and I'll see you next time.